This is Georg Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit by Robert Brandom. Now, this came out a long time ago, this book, but this is a contemporary review. I think it's a little bit of fun. And Brandom is no random poser. No, this is... So someone is writing a review of a classic text in a contemporary journal. This is from 2008 in Topoi. So this is, it's a little bit, I think, a little bit of fun, really. But so it's, I think the idea is, and I have not read this before, but the idea is kind of like subjecting some philosophy from 200 years ago, because this came out in, I think, the 1800s, to some modern standards, which is, if you ever see, there is someone who made an art piece a while back where they took modern bodybuilding referees and had them criticize Greek statues. And it's like, it's an interesting thing because we have different standards now that we judge things by. And so, like, they're pointing out all these, like, flaws on these, like, marble statues. And it's like, there's something, like, insane about it, but something also very fascinating about it. Lumen says the gimmick is that he's pretending it's a new book by an unknown nobody. Yep. So, yeah. So, okay. And this is what the man looks like. Let's take a look. Oh, yeah. So, this is, damn it, OBS. So, yeah, this is a very, about as philosophy coded as you can get. Like, sort of looking old white man with the beard. So, yeah. It's funny. Alright, so here we go. And as always, my first time reading what I'm reading right here, I am not endorsing this. So if he says something stupid, I'm going to call him out on it, but I'm not endorsing it. We're not, like, reading it because I already thought it was good, but, like, yeah. So, and as always, if you have questions, let me know. I will try to answer the best I can. Here we go. The Anglophone philosophical world is currently riding a swelling wave of enthusiasm for a big, dense blockbuster of a book by the previously unknown Jena philosopher Georg Hegel. So, like, this is already, you can see, the previously unknown Jena philosopher Georg Hegel. Of course, Hegel already, like, there's Hegel, like, scholars out there, which Brandom, I believe, is of one of them. His Phenomenology of Spirit, originally in German, now available also in English, picks up and weaves together in a surprising and wholly original way a large number of today's most fashionable ideas. Although he never comes right out and says so, I take it that the main topic of the book addresses the notion that of conceptual content. I say main topic, and even that with a trepidation, because along the way, Hegel discusses practically everything. History, politics, art, literature, religion, psychology, sociology, natural science, and so on. One of the masterful features of this magnum opus is the convincing way in which the arguments and considerations he brings to bear in the course of articulating criteria of adequacy for an adequate semantics, which he thinks is inseparable from an adequate pragmatics, reverberate and ramify throughout our understanding of human culture generally. I mean, as far as a review goes, this is a very, very strong first paragraph. It makes it seem like, man, we have been missing out on this philosopher if you did not know who it was. Lumen says he is half Hegel scholar, half analytic philosopher of language. Yeah, and I've said this before on stream. I also think Hegel has a lot of good in there that we have still yet to sort of like understand. So there's a lot of stuff, like I still think Hegel's an important philosopher and that's the only measure of like philosophers is like, are they worth reading? And I also say why I think so, like who asks good questions? That's the only real like measure of a philosopher. Now, in terms of like the sociology of like what should be taught and people should spend their time doing, Hegel is still, I think, within that group of people that we need to still read and think about. Okay. Part of the foundation of the edifice on offer here is an appreciation of the essentially normative character of intentionality. This is a lesson we learned already from later Wittgenstein, who made us sensitive to the issue of how a mental state, such as an intention or speech act such as a request, could somehow reach out to all possible sequelae? Don't even know that word, to settle which of them would count as being an appropriate response in the sense of fulfilling that intention or request. When the mother asks someone to teach the children a game, and he responds by teaching them to bet on dice, she says, I didn't mean that kind of game. And when what she says is true, even though she didn't explicitly think about the matter. Yeah, so this is part of it. It's like, what are we doing when we're talking? you can't just assume that we're like trying to represent the world. You have to realize when we say things, there is quite often more to it than just being like, well, this is true or this is false. You just be like, well, this is how the world is. We're doing more than that. There's a lot of stuff we do with language that is more complicated than just like stating facts or like desires. But like, so when you say teach the kids a game, you mean something fun for them that would be like not objectionable. So there's a lot built into it. Neil says, Brandom wrote the book on Hegel. I mean, one of money, but it's a pretty big deal. Yeah. Sequelae, things that follow from. Okay. I don't know my Latin. I'm sorry. It's like, yeah, I mean, a sequitur, I assume like a non sequitur, something that doesn't follow. Sequelae, okay, I should have been able to pick up on that, but I'm sorry. You got me. Okay. Hegel associates the point with Kant. He sees the axis around which Kant's thought revolves as being the idea that what distinguishes the judgments and actions of sapient creatures from those of less capable animals is that they are acts that subjects are in a distinctive sense responsible for. This deontological criterion of demarcation of intentionality, the sense of consciousness Hegel addresses, puts the question of how to understand conceptual normativity at top of the philosophical agenda. English, sequels, fair enough. But like, yeah, I mean, I have never seen sequelae before. Though he attributes this question to Kant rather than Wittgenstein, Hegel offers an answer that owes more to Wittgenstein, for he insists that the kind of normative statuses that matter for intentionality, what we are responsible for or committed to, what we have invested our authority in, are one and all social statuses. Okay, so like we're basing everything in social status here. Like, so we are social creatures, and this is what we actually should be taking as fundamental. When we are talking about stuff, we're talking about the social sphere. In this, he concurs with the Wittgensteinian tradition that emphasizes social practices, uses, customs, and institutions as providing the context within which alone we can understand the normative significance, even of such mundane items as signposts. But where Wittgenstein is suspicious in principle of philosophical theorizing, Hegel is an ambitious, constructive system builder. Perhaps in this difference lies part of the explanation of his otherwise unaccountable failure to acknowledge this distinguished antecedent of Hegel's views in favor of earlier precursors. Yeah, so this is just being snarky here because, you know, Hegel is long dead by the time Wittgenstein is writing. Hegel's idea that the normative statuses are instituted by reciprocal recognition, a particular structure of normative attitudes. Recognizing someone is attributing normative statuses, taking or treating that individual as responsible, committed, entitled, or authoritative. Recognize is attributing normative statuses. Sorry. Hegel thinks that actually to be responsible, committed, entitled, or authoritative is to be recognized as such by those one recognizes as authoritative in this respect. Other contemporary fans of theories structurally like this, Habermas, Hanneth, Darwall, among others, go undiscussed. Yeah, again, being snarky. That is what is required for, let me finish this paragraph. That is what is required for what he calls actual self-consciousness, to be what one takes oneself to be. Okay, so this isn't just him being snarky. Brandon here is also being like, look at all these people that have this Hegelian idea within their philosophy. He says all these people that Hegel's not referencing, well, these are all people that may or may not, but should be referencing Hegel in their philosophy because this was in Hegel. So he's doing a very cutesy sort of reversal here. Okay, here is a mundane example. Achieving the status of being a good chess player is not something I can do simply by adopting a certain attitude towards myself. It is, in a certain sense, up to me whom I regard as a good chess player, whether I count any wood pusher who can play a legal game, only formidable club players, masters, or grandmasters. That is, it is up to me whom I recognize as good chess players in the sense in which I aspire to be one. But it is not then in the same sense up to me whether I qualify as one of them. To earn their recognition in turn, I must be able to play up to their standards. To be, say, a formidable club player, I must be recognized as such by those I recognize as such. My recognitive attitudes can be can define a virtual community, but only in the reciprocal recognition by those I recognize can make me actually a member of it. Accord me the status for which I have implicitly petitioned by recognizing them. Unreal says, you're not reading Hegel, but you should be. That's exactly what I'm getting off this review. It's that all these people are in the Hegelian tradition, whether they know it or not. And so that's definitely the what I feel the subtext is in that previous paragraph. Okay. And this is fair. It's we were talking about institutional recognition earlier. Well, yeah, you have to recognize the institution, and then once the institution recognizes you, and you're in the museum and you recognize the museum as being part of the, what makes art, art as being in the museum, and then once you're in it, then you have to say you're an artist. So I got yelled at because I never called myself a philosopher, and then a very important, not super famous, but world famous in logic, just be no, you're a philosopher. He yelled at me. I'm okay, I'm a philosopher. So it's I was recognized by an important person in the world of philosophy and logic. So it's then I had to say, well, I am then if I am recognized by one of those people. And so this is a good point. This is quite often how things happen. When the people that you appreciate then include you in the club, then you're in the club. What it is. Okay, this story about the relation between normative statuses and normative attitudes is told as part of a vast narrative about the transition from traditional to modern societies generally. In taking modernity as an explicit topic of philosophical reflection, Mr. Hegel signs on to a tradition that has been flourishing since the early 19th century. Again, another joke, because that's when Hegel started writing this, is that it's been flourishing since he came up with this sort of analysis. One that has spawned whole disciplines, for instance, political science and sociology. This goes back to Kant, of course, also. To a first approximation, he thinks that only one big thing ever happened in the history of the world, the titanic transformation of society, selves, and self-consciousness that is the transition from the old to the modern world. Traditional society, beginning with the Greeks and culminating in the ancient regime, understood normative statuses as objective written in the non, pre, or superhuman world as it objectively is independently of any normative attitudes. Yeah, so it was that's just what you were was preordained by the gods or society, not society, but the gods or whatever. It's objective. In a gesture patently pandering to contemporary feminist and postmodern orthodoxies, Hegel condemns his view as essentialist. The essence of modernity is to see that the norms we are bound by are not just there antecedently to and independently of our doings. The characteristically modern insight is that norms are not, as traditional forms of life implicitly took them to be, independent of the subjective normative attitude of concept users. They are rather products of our own recognitive practices. Classical social contract political theories understood this point at least darkly. What is good is written in the stars, etc. Yeah. So I was somehow we were, the way the universe is objectively going to say how we are. It's he's no, this is social, and we determine our social relations. You become part of a group, and that group accepts you, but that then changes the group, of course, and it moves on. So that's part of this. Adam says, goes back to when in Rome do as the Romans do, or Protagoras, man is the measure of all things. Well, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard, there's always going to be a gloss on the ancient Greek world. So there's a lot of things that we take to be oh, this is the way Greeks looked at stuff. And then if you talk to a classicist, they're well, yeah, a lot of people said that, but then these other Greeks said other things. And then you're okay, well, what was the Greek attitude? It's it's hard to say. Some people said one thing and then, well, man is the measure of all things. It's okay, well, it's a little different. It's not ordained. So yeah. It's, to be fair, it's this is a gloss on history, but we are always doing this. But that's fair. That's maybe this is a little too fast, Hegel and Brandom. Okay. Though the modern I can't speak. Though the move let me drink some water. I don't talk this much. I talk more on stream than I do like all day, sometimes for days. Though the move to modern sensibility, understanding, self-consciousness, and institutions was for him indeed the decisive advance in human history, Hegel does not see it as a pure advance. Something is lost too. He calls what is lost Sittlichkeit. Our translator renders this not very helpfully as ethical life. Still bitching about translations, of course. And the situation we are precipitated into by this loss, alienation, where to be alienated is to be unable to understand oneself practically as bound by norms. Appreciating the role of normative recognitive attitudes in instituting normative statuses seems completely to undercut the authority, validity, or bindingness of those norms, the very thing that, according to Kant and Wittgenstein, makes us sapient knowers and agents subject of intentional states becomes unintelligible. I don't know if I agree with Brandom's take on Wittgenstein here. I don't think laws are what make Wittgenstein, or at least late Wittgenstein, think us as sapient. Like, I think that would be wrong. But I'll grant him the Kant because I don't give a fuck about Kant. So Kant can be wrong. I gotta conserve the speaking energies for the right moments, says Luminance. Yes, I try. This problem has a long history. The general form of thought is, again, that the possibility of offering a certain kind of genealogical account of the process by which a conceptual content developed or was determined by normative attitudes can seem to undercut the rational bindingness of the normative statuses that have that content. Yeah, so if like we're developing the normative statuses by joining and leaving groups, then that undercuts that as defining what counts as like a normative status, because we are always like it's always modifying by who exactly exists at that point. So I mean that is an interesting position. If we're always joining and leaving social groups, but those social groups are like what define certain things, then what is defining those groups is shifting as over time. Who is against a consistent blabber yapper? I mean, this is the just chatting category. So yeah, it's like, I had someone come in here once and was like, holy shit, how much do you talk? I'm like, you're on Twitch and just chatting. What the fuck are you even doing here? And I was like, get out. I was just like, go leave if you, like, leave the whole section of Twitch if you don't want to be here where someone's yapping constantly. It's like, what is Twitch but a lot of times people playing video games as an excuse to like chat about stuff? Seriously. Like, that wasn't even that long ago. Well, it was kind of long ago now, but it was like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, get the fuck off the platform if you don't, like, want to deal with it. Like, you don't have to be here. No one forced you here. At least I hope not. Alright. Continuing. We see it deployed to devastating effect by the great unmaskers of the later 19th century, above all Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. Suppose that the correct answer to the question why we draw the distinction between right and wrong as we do in some area of discourse is a causal explanation in terms of economic class structure, or a quasi-biological account in terms of the limited number of ways the will to power can manifest itself in the weak, or a description of how early traumas incurred while acting out the family romance reliably recathect libido into standard repressed adult forms. Again, I have no idea what some of these terms are. Recathect libido, I take it that's something technical in Freud. Luminance says, random drive by rude commenter is such a weird phenomenon. Yeah, it is. But I mean, you're going to get some nutcases on Twitch like any population. But like it was just kind of weird. You know, I'm in other people's streams and like people come in and they criticize them, and in some sense, if it doesn't happen too much, it's just a little flavor every so often. You just get to make fun of the person. It's like, yeah, you're the idiot that came here and was wasting your own time on something you don't like. Like, no one was forcing you to type in chat. Like, really. So it's like, if they want to come and get made fun of, they can come and get made fun of. I'll just make fun of them. Cathect is a Freudian term. Yeah, recathect. What the fuck? Okay, but again, this is Brandom sort of poking fun at the history of how Hegelian ideas had uptake across different philosophers and areas. Okay, so yeah, so Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. If any such genealogy can causally explain why our normative attitudes have the content that they do, why we make the judgments we do instead of some others, then the issue of the rational justifiability of those attitudes as acknowledging genuine norms seems to lapse. Yeah. Yeah, so let me just reread that one, make sure I understand what the fuck's going on. Yeah, so if you're just like, if it's just some history, then of course you can get out of that history. It's like that, it's not an independent justification. That would be just sort of a contingent sort of thing, and it's not actually normative, or it's only normative for that one little time, and it would not, it wouldn't be a genuine norm at that point. So that's the question. If you're acknowledging that these things are based in certain times and places, then what really are you doing? It's just some sort of like social phenomena that is maybe transitory. Okay, more recently we have seen similar arguments mounted by Foucault and Derrida, each in his own way, following Nietzsche. Reason is just the modern forms of power relations, or just one more sort of aesthetic play one can engage in with words. It is a measure of his status as lonesome, isolated, self-confident genius that Hegel doesn't bother to mention these well-known avatars of the disease of modernity he seeks to diagnose and treat. Yeah, again, so we're getting this sort of like all these people that are like children of Hegelian thought, and Hegel's just like, yeah, I don't care about them. This is arguably one of the big problems with which Wittgenstein wrestled as well. How can we see the norms without which our intentionality is not only unintelligible, but impossible as genuinely and rationally binding on us once we have seen them as contingent, conditioned on adventitious and parochial features of our particular embodiment, history, and training? I will say, I don't know if this is how Brandom normally writes, but this is like overly flowery, and this is one of the reasons I'm tripping up on it, but it's like parochial features of our particular embodiment, history, and training. Like, it's a little bit over the top. Granted, this is a little bit of a jokey piece, but like, this is why I'm fumbling so bad today. The writing is not meant to be read out loud. It's meant to just sort of be mulled over with wry humor. Yeah, no problem, Luminance. This is not the worst like I've read, but like there's a reason why I'm stumbling today. It's that like it's just there's a overly flowery language that is being used for a certain effect, but like it's not meant to be read out loud. It's meant to just sort of be ruminated and laughed at. Yeah. So yeah, yeah, and so this is fair. It's like Wittgenstein was like, how do we actually understand what is governing our philosophical problems? This is bringing up basically how do we lead the fly back out of the fly bottle? How do we actually get out of like these conundrums that we've got ourselves into for no good reason? And it's like, yeah, well, the Hegelian answer is, well, we've got these historical social power relations or social normative relations that we've got ourselves into, and that's really what's going on. And so Wittgenstein should actually go back to the Hegel to say, okay, this is the framework to get us ourselves out of these normative conundrums. Like, what should we be doing with ourselves? This problematic is recognizably a way of engaging with the question of how norms fit into a natural world. So, yes. Normative attitudes are part of the causal order. They are caused and can cause us to act, as the debunkers of both the 19th and 20th centuries emphasize. More recently, thinkers such as Harman, also not referred to in our text, have argued that Occam's razor in the form of inference to the best explanation accordingly requires us to give up the idea that we are answerable to norms, in effect, Sittlichkeit, since everything can be explained naturalistically by normative attitudes, whatever their provenance. In opposition to this contemporary inclination, Hegel seeks to find a place for norms in nature. Yeah, so I mean, if you just want to be like, you can always make up another reason or whatever, just like if you're just coming up with like whatever the best explanation is, it's like, no, Hegel's like, look, you're trying to find something out there. You're just not coming up with any old reason you like. What is needed, our author thinks, is some way of reconciling what the ancients knew, that our normative attitudes are responsible to our actual normative statuses, with what the moderns learned, that normative statuses are nothing apart from our normative attitudes. Hegel thinks that in the end, his model of reciprocal recognition provides the theoretical raw materials that are necessary and sufficient to make this possible. As already indicated, he thinks reciprocal recognition, a structure of normative attitudes, is what exhibiting a normative status consists in. He accordingly envisages a third stage of human history in which this lesson is explicitly embraced, and the lesson of modernity is reconciled with Sittlichkeit so that alienation is overcome. This postmodern form of self-conscious he alarmingly calls absolute knowing. This review, alas, can encompass the details of his resolution of this difficulty, astonishing and stimulating as it is. Luhmann says, yeah, we made it back to naturalism, physicalism. Again, we were talking about this earlier for people who don't know, is how we started off stream, but like, yeah, if you're going to put the norms as sort of naturalistic, well, then what's your nature? Well, the nature is these reciprocal normative things. So this is basing what is real in our normative reciprocal relations. So this is a social theory of reality, really. And then everything else is based off that. So I was like, again, when we were talking about what's material, you could say that the material, if you're a materialist, well, what's material here is normative status relations. That's what's material in this world. Not physical stuff. Status relations, which is an interesting thing, but you could call that a kind of material in itself. You can do these sorts of things in metaphysics. Okay. So much for the grand world historical significance of properly understanding the social nature, origins, and structure of the kind of normativity that articulates intentionality and sapience generally. How is it actually supposed to work? That is, what sort of semantics goes with the pragmatics of reciprocal recognition. Here Hegel decisively distinguishes himself from both his unmentioned hero, Deus abscondus Wittgenstein. Both, it is true, assert the centrality and essential contribution of language to sapience and intentionality, the possibility of discursive understanding, knowledge, and agency. Sprach, Hegel, I don't know how to speak German, Sprache, Sprach, Hegel says, is the Dasein of Geist, so the being of what, something or other. The latter being his term sufficiently significant to appear in the title of his book for the normative realm that we make by our activities and that makes us into the kind of being we are, what Kant called the realm of freedom, because he thought of being free as being constrained by norms rather than by laws whose bindingness owed nothing to our normative attitudes. Sprache, okay, just means language, okay. But Wittgenstein notoriously insists that language has no downtown, that has no essence, but consists entirely in a sprawl of suburban neighborhoods whose disposition is intelligible in principle only genealogically in terms of the actual contingent extension of one sub-practice to another. Hegel could not disagree more. Yeah, again, this is sort of like, I think this is, to be fair, it's a little bit of a using Wittgenstein as a whipping boy here. It's not exactly full Wittgenstein, which is okay again. But it's like, you're just saying, well, Wittgenstein's like, nah, there's no real language. You're just going and like using different language games in different spots. A little unfair to the language game theory, but like, yeah, if Hegel's going to say, no, we're just not like playing different language games at different times. There is something else there. Hegel could not disagree more. Language, he thinks, does have a downtown, a set of practices that make it a discursive, which, following Kant to say, a concept-mongering practice. The practice is one that Kant had already distinguished as what is required to synthesize the original synthetic unity of apperception, namely the practice of treating some commitments, normative statuses, as materially incompatible with others, and as having still other as material inferential consequences by extruding the incompatible commitments and including the consequential ones from those that are acknowledged, a matter of normative attitudes. And this is what I was saying when I was saying you can treat this as a materialistic theory, that the normative attitudes are the matter. You can call this like a materialism. It's just that the normative attitudes are what makes up material in this world. So that's why you're getting this material talk here. What is inferential from this matter depends on these normative attitudes. And so it's like a matter of normative attitudes. Hegel's idiosyncratic terminology. You know what I'm going to do? Do this. So like this helps actually. Maybe you guys can see better. I don't know. Hegel's idiosyncratic terminology for material inferential and incompatibility relations is mediation and determinate negation. To be conceptually articulated for him is to stand in such relations to other such contents. This is the basis of his response to the reductivist, naturalistic, and romantic 19th and 20th century, but particularly opposite as a response to Foucault and Derrida. Talking at all involves acquiescing in and employing inferentially articulated conceptual contents. It follows that unless one engages in practices of giving and asking for reasons, rationally integrating commitments, one cannot mean anything. One cannot use those meanings to exert power nor engage in literary play without implicitly acknowledging the normative force of reasons in the form of what is incompatible with what and what is a consequent of what. And so this is like the logic. You need something that has a normative force to have a logic, is the claim here. Concept mongering is a great image. My dad is a fishmonger. Yeah. So, but I mean, a lot of people in the history of philosophy have been trying to get rid of metaphysics. Oh, we need less metaphysics, less things like concepts. And like, there's a good reason for that. Quite often we get a little full of ourselves in philosophy, but like, yeah, it's like you need to actually have some ideas, some concepts, some metaphysics. I don't think we can actually get away from it fully. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's a fair thing. Now, what does that actually consist in a good philosophy? Well, that's different. Luminance says, hawking my ontology at the market space of reasons. I mean, Luminance, we're on Twitch. That's exactly what we're doing. So it's like, that's exactly why we're here. We are hawking metaphysics ontology in like the place where people come to like chat up like the streamers and whatnot. So it's not that, I mean, that is why I came to Twitch. I said, I'll say it again. I decided to stream philosophy on Twitch. I was like, well, what can I do? Because it was a pandemic. Where can I go that like people are doing stuff and like engaging with each other, but that has like nothing to do with what I'm doing? Well, I'm going to go to Twitch where people are gaming and talking about games and like discussing strategies. And I'm going to go do philosophy and treat it like a game and discuss it. So like, that's exactly what's happening here. And I haven't really changed a whole lot since I started doing philosophy roulette in March of 2020. So, it was called Phil Papers Roulette for the first like episode or two. Okay, yeah, so this is like, what's the logic here? Well, there has to be something normative. Now the question is it a normative social relation all the time? I don't know. In logic, it's like, yeah, gadflies of Twitch. You know, I criticize Socrates a lot because, again, he got killed. Like, he got himself killed. But, like, you definitely see the trolls around Twitch. And it's like, well, I don't really want to be, like, I'm a little bit trolly at times, but, like, that's not really what I'm going for. But, like, yes, gadflies kind of suck. But, like, yes, it is a little trolly. And that is part of being out here. Okay. This understanding of conceptual contents has three notable consequences, all of which connect with claims that have been independently motivated and defended by contemporary philosophers, all of whom characteristically go unmentioned by our author. Again, pointing out that the sorts of things Hegel is talking about are rampant in modern philosophy. What do I think about Brandom's claim there? It seems like a Wittgenstein would have a problem with it for rule-following reasons. What do you mean exactly? Like that. I mean, I think what you mean is that Hegel says there is definitely a structure to language and how it works. And so Wittgenstein saying like there's no rules and like it's all just sort of language games that have like, you know, self-defined and contained sort of like standards into themselves, and we're doing different things at different times. Hegel's going, no. What we're doing is governed by the full-on sort of like reciprocal status norm sort of thing going on. That's what's going on at all times. I think that, as I think I just said, it's overly simplistic. Well, if you're talking about what's compatible with what and what is a consequence of what, like, I think tracking that back always to social norms is going to be really difficult. That you're basically shoehorning all of logic, all of metaphysics, and everything else into a single structure. Now, you can abstract always onto anything you want. Like, you can always say, okay, look, there is a structure that we can put on this. But the question is this fundamental to the world or the fundamental to our reason? And this is why I treat Hegel like an idealist. We can always put a sort of structure on stuff and be like, well, look, this follows from that for that reason. But that can also be like sort of begging the question or an ad hoc sort of thing. So my view on the sort of like the abstract negation and then sublimation, like the overcoming, is like, yeah, of course you can do that, but it doesn't actually mean anything in the particular. So yeah, you can always abstract away from whatever you're doing, but you're not actually getting any information out of it. So it's just like, that's more talking about, like how we talk about abstraction, how we talk about rhetoric. But have you actually talked about the world at that point? No, you've given sort of a description of how we philosophize. I hope that makes sense, Luminous. Let me know. Adam says, from my memory, Wittgenstein wouldn't agree with any isms. He isn't a naturalist, having heard biographer and philosopher write about him, suggesting reading Who's Naturalism, which Wittgenstein, Anthony Ketting. Yeah, I think that's exactly the point here, is that Wittgenstein doesn't want to be pinned down on this way, and then Hegel saying, no, it is these social normative reciprocal relations that does pin one thing down. So yeah, I think that's exactly right, because Wittgenstein's avoiding getting pinned down, and Hegel's going, nah, this is what it is. Adam says, in the late, Wittgenstein was a pragmatist, no rigid structures about language use, is language game. Yeah, exactly. And so Hegel wants to say, no, there is an underlying language, underlying game, it's this reciprocal normative thing. Lumen says, yeah, I got what I meant. I think I was referring to the conceptual content of language is determined by its occurring within the space of giving and asking reasons things. Yeah. Oh, Lord, linguistics. Maddie, not so much. We're doing more metaphysics here. But, like, I don't know if that's any better. We're talking about the reasons why... Because we're talking Hegel, Maddie. So, and how you doing? Hope you're having a good day. Hegel says everything comes down to normative social relations. How, like, I feel like I'm in a group and being part of a group put certain restrictions on me, but like I join the groups, the group changes because I join it, and then like the normative social relations are sort of like wrapped up in that. And then this just was the application to language in this paragraph. That's all. Oh, you love linguistics, but those universal hardwired linguistics get sticky fast. Yeah. So this claim here is that whenever we're talking about stuff, the whole point is it comes back to social relations. That's a Hegelian point, and that's what's going on in this part in the article. Yeah. Luminance says, seems like giving and asking for reasons would have at least some minimal kind of rule following involved. I mean, yeah, but is that all that we're always doing? Are we always just giving and asking for reasons? Like, is that really everything we're doing in language? And I think we've got more things going on. I think that's why Wittgenstein was so hesitant on this. It's like the complexity of human life is not just giving and like asking for reasons. And I feel like that's an overly simplistic view of what we're doing in language. You don't know enough about Hegel? Okay, so Maddie, this is a tongue-in-cheek review we're reading here. So you can see Georg Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, but it's reviewed. This is from 2008. This is a review of a book from like 1800s that is being reviewed as if it just came out today. And so there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek things here, but then it's also, showing that it has applicability to many things we're still discussing. Yeah. So that's what's going on. It's very sort of a fun little paper. So yeah. Okay, so yeah. So what are we doing? All right, so here we go. Unreal says, fun idea, but man, it's gotten way into the weeds really quickly. Yeah, like this was part of the danger here is like no one's going to be able to control themselves doing this because they're very, very excited about the topic. And so it's like all of a sudden, like we're like arguing with like some version of Wittgenstein, which I don't think is completely fair. Granted, I'm Wittgensteinian, so I'm going to be biased here. But it's like, yeah, they're arguing with like a version of Wittgenstein that like, I mean, how many people actually know like what's going on in Wittgenstein? Some people in philosophy do, but not everybody. But like, yeah, what is this argument? Okay, so yeah, here continuing though. First, he derives from this conception of conceptual content a radically holistic semantics. If the contents of concepts are a matter of their relations of mediation and determinate negation to other such contents, then our talk of such contents must make reference not only to the judgments such concepts appear in, but also ultimately to the whole constellation of conceptual commitments articulated by those relations, what Hegel calls the concept, comprising of judgments, practical commitments, and commitments regarding what relations of material inferential consequence and incompatibility all the possible commitments stand into one another. Yeah, so like if you have one sort of concept, it stands in relation to all the other ones. It's got a context, how we say it a lot nowadays. Though of course we have had other defenders, not always willing, of semantic holism, Hegel is perhaps the philosopher most committed to rigorously thinking through the consequences of this view, not a coherent theory of truth, but of meaning. Okay, and puts in parentheses, truth conditions. Yeah, and there is some sense where to understand all the words in the Bible, the dictionary, you have to understand most of the other words in the dictionary, and all the words in the dictionary all relate to all the other ones, and that's what the understanding is. Unreal says, yeah, I don't know either Hegel or Wittgenstein well enough to keep up. And that's fair. This is sort of inside baseball for Hegelians. Because they're all like reading this like, he, didn't Hegel say all these smart things and people still don't understand. And Luminous doesn't know analytic philosophy well enough to keep up. See, this is the funny thing. Like, I may be the only person positioned here because I'm a weirdo to begin with to understand what the hell's going on, and I don't know Hegel well enough. But maybe it's not as relevant as you think. None of this is relevant. None of this is relevant. It's a joke article. But like you do need to be kind of like a Hegelian to get all like to understand the Hegelian position, but you have to be like, Robert Brandom, like, ooh la la, big time philosopher, to get all like the little inside jokes. Do I get them all? No. But like, I get some of this. It's like, yeah. See, now we're going to Quine. Okay. Second, where Quine, our most prominent recent holist, though not mentioned as such in Hegel's extended development of his own holistic system, again, trying to throw Quine into this group of people who owe Hegel something. Second, where Quine, our most prominent holist, thinking in no small part of the ontologically holistic British absolute idealists, again, the idealists were coming out of the German idealism, of course, said that meaning is what essence becomes when it is detached from the thing and attached to the word. Hegel thinks that both subjectively entertained through thoughts, conceptual content subjects can be committed to, and objective states of affairs are alike conceptually articulated. So yeah, everything, like if you have to understand one thing, it's like you only understand it in relation to everything else being around it and how that spot relates to all the other things. Like you understand me sitting here because, you understand all the other stuff, and that explains what it is for me to be sitting here. Unreal says, I think Quine might knife him over that. A lot of people, again, this is tongue-in-cheek a little bit. For facts and states of affairs too stand to one another in relation of consequence and incompatibility. Yeah, so you understand that if I'm sitting here, it's because I'm not standing. And so if you understood, like I could stand up, but that would mean I'm not sitting. And so you understand sitting in terms of not standing. You understand me being in this room as opposed to being any other room, etc., etc., etc. And that's how you like piece together what you see on screen. Okay, that a coin is pure copper entails that it melts at a 1084C and is incompatible with it being an electric insulator. This resolutely non-psychological conception of the conceptual as coeval with modal realism underwrites a vision of the objective world no less than the subjects who know it and act in it as conceptually articulated. Yeah, so now we've got all these concepts as built into the world. That's what the world is it being one way and not another way. Again, very idealistic. Like you've got these ideas and that's what the world is kind of made of. In a phrase that we would, although Mr. Hegel, apparently innocent of Anglophone philosophy, he does not associate with McDowell, his view is that the conceptual has no outer boundary. If I understand him correctly, he thinks a view he calls idealism, that although, of course, there can be an objective world, and the facts that it comprises quite independently of the conceptual activity of sapient intentional subjects, we cannot understand the conceptual articulated world apart from our understanding of what it is to integrate commitments into a rational, original synthetic unity of apperception that includes inferential consequences and excludes incompatible commitments. Yeah, so now he's pulling in the other famous analytic Hegelian. I mean, that's fair. If the other famous analytic Hegelian didn't show up in this, it'd be like, well, I mean, that would be exclusionary, which clearly this is trying to knock everyone all at once. Third, and as a result, Hegel endorses the view also associated, though not by him, with Wittgenstein and not coincidentally McDowell, that has been called an identity theory of truth. When things go well, the content of our thought is a fact. As Wittgenstein says, when we say and mean that such and such is the case, we and our meaning do not stop anywhere short of the fact, but we mean this is so. Yeah, like this is so. Yeah, so this is the old, like, when the world, like, it's sort of the redundancy theory. The world is this way. When we say it is that way, it's just, that's the fact. Luhmann says, doing philosophy like cooking, where you have to invent a dish with every ingredient you have in the fridge. Well, I don't think that's fair, actually. You are cooking this dish in opposition to every other dish that has ever been made using every other ingredient. That's what makes this dish particular and every other dish different. So it's not that you're using all the ingredients all at once. You are purposely excluding all of the other ingredients to make this specific dish. So when I cook that Pop-Tart in the toaster, I'm excluding every other possibility I could be eating by eating that Pop-Tart for my meal. Like, I think that's more the thing here. So, okay, in terms of putting every name possible into the review, haha, yeah, that's fair. But I mean, again, it's not really a review. It's sort of like, it's a joke that everyone is supposed to be in on. But you see, and the funny part is, he's trying to pull everyone in to get in on his joke to make the relevance of Hegel more important. So that you get all the people in, and you'd be like, oh, look, and you like, haha, Hegel, but then you've got everyone going, haha, Hegel at the same time, and so that is making everyone be like, oh yeah, Hegel. Okay. This whole line of thought is undeniably suggestive and undeniably controversial. It is defended from the suspicion of parochialism and conceptual conservatism by Hegel's insistence, downstream if unacknowledgedly from Kuhn, that the process by which conceptual contents develop is essential to the content they express. Yeah, so again, now we're getting Tom Kuhn here, who also was doing a sort of process of historical evolution of ideas in science. So almost explicitly Hegelian on Kuhn's part. Probably was. That process is the process of rational integration, exhibiting both the ampliative dimension of extracting material inferential consequences and the critical dimension of resolving material incompatibilities. On this account, the genealogy of a particular set of inferential and incompatibility commitments, the way they have arisen through the rational rectification of actual prior commitments, is essential to understanding their validity, the bindingness of the norms they embody. Again, using these logical terms in a social way. Like, it's the norms they embody. It's not a logical thing here. Again, we got to remember this is a social theory that is fundamental here, not some physical theory or other sort of metaphysics. We have by no means seen our way to the bottom of things in this vicinity, but in this book, Hegel evidently gives us new things to think about and new lines of thought to pursue, even if many of the raw materials he is assembling in new combinations have by now been around for a while. There is a lot more in the book than I have been able so much as to mention. Among the many other treasures it contains, I would single out particularly the Salesian idea that holistic semantic considerations significantly constrain our epistemological theories, developed in the consciousness section of the book, and the post-Davidsonian theory of rational intentional agency, developed in the reason section of the book. Luhmann says necessary and sufficient conditions, if you could give them, would be historically genealogical. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, and you can see that there is a point here. What people take as fundamental and like necessary will change over time based on, like, you know, circumstances. very rarely is there like only one thing. Like you'd only get this in like logic, really, where you have like the necessity of inference and everything else. Like, I mean, and even then, like you could ask what that means. Hegel would have a different answer than like a logician at that point. But like then you can argue about that. But arguing the difference in inference for Hegel versus the difference for like a pure logician, you need like sophisticated people to actually understand what's going on in that argument. So like the necessary like from P to like if P then Q, P therefore Q, that therefore is that historically mediated or is that something else? And the logicians would probably say there's a logical phenomena. That's what I would say. And Hegel saying, well, that's still a normative thing in a social sense. And I'd say, well, you'd have to explain how logical inference is a social thing. Then he'd probably have to argue, well, now I'm just going on and on. But like, yeah, this is how you'd go about this. Okay, the phenomenology of spirit is an odd, Janus-faced amalgam looking forward and backward at the same time. It develops a constellation of ideas consonant with the very latest philosophical trends, pursued at least in some rarefied circles, a historicized social practice approach to conceptual normativity encompassing a holistic semantics that emphasizes language as the medium in which an already conceptually articulated world becomes explicit for us. The author has not, for whatever reason or causes, explicitly acknowledged the evident affiliations with contemporary philosophical views that makes his claims so resonant and suggestive, indeed provocative and stimulating. Yet he has not hesitated to present this up-to-the-minute content in the form of a grand, systematic, all-encompassing metaphysical meta-narrative of a sort that is decidedly out of fashion these days. The tone, too, is oddly out of step with today's intellectual sensibilities, for although imbued throughout with an appreciation of the tragic aspects of modern existence, it exudes a sunny, optimistic faith that conflict, failure, and error are the engines of progress, that there's a kind of philosophically achievable rational self-understanding that when suitably internalized as a form of self-consciousness and externalized as culture can decisively overcome the systematic alienation characteristic of modern selves and their institutions. That's a fucking long sentence, my friends. This enigmatic combination of ideas and attitudes, think of Dewey as a logical linguistic rationalist, is too important and suggestive and bears on too many issues of substantial contemporary significance for us to ignore simply because of the admitted idiosyncrasies and difficulties of the reference and expression that permeate this fabulous, intimidating masterpiece. And I think it is unlikely that we will ever fully digest this rich, original, magisterial, self-consciously contradictory work. I would love to have written this book, perhaps when sufficiently steeped in this timely, untimely spirit, like Borges Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote. Someday I will. Okay. Now we review this ridiculousness that I just read. So, anyone who is new here, what we do is we have an emote review. Spam some emotes. So if you thought this was fun and made your brain dance, you give it a brain dance. If you thought this was had some existential or artistic or social drama, nog scream. If you thought this had deep ancient ideas, you give it a nog Ouroboros, a nog Oro. Slicing and dicing arguments, nog knife. If it was nasal gazing only for academics, you give it a nog navel. Nog turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And nog grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also give it the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, or my vote meh. Note that all the emotes of the green I give an overall score will make the score go up. Everything in the red will make the score go down. And the vote meh will actually make everything go towards the middle. So yeah, thank you for suggesting this, Luminance. This was fun and silly. Yeah, so bravo. I see the brain, but you actually have to do what I have here. Brain dance, you have to spell and capitalize correctly. So you are welcome to rate, but like if you want me to fix it, I will fix it later. But like yeah, like if you want to do it, you have to use, and these are better TTV emotes. So you should be able to see them on the screen below me, or if you have the better TTV or like the Frankerface plugins, like that makes it work. So yes, thank you for the ratings. Unreal Brian, Brain Dance and a Knife, MDD, what's up MDD, Brain and Ouroboros, Lumens gave it a brain and Ouroboros, Adam gave it a yay and a navel gazing. I'm feeling a little navel gazing here too. Like the idea, like everyone in chat was saying like Brandom is like referencing all these weird things. Like this is such inside baseball. It really is. Luminous says, I was thinking of doing both a knife and a navel. Yeah, well, feel free to do it. Yeah, so. Yeah, and thank you for sticking through that. The way it was written, I don't know if this is how Brandom normally writes, but like it was a little bit flowery and like over the top, I feel like, for rhetorical flourish. And so, yeah. And so that made it a little bit difficult to read. I think I needed to like, zoom the screen in a little bit and get into it, and then I could read it. But like, for me to like, it's hard for me to do stuff that's written with like obvious flourish and like giant sentences. Maybe that's just how Brandom is. I don't know. Yeah. You'll add the navel? Yeah. Thank you, Bravo, for fixing it. I appreciate that. Saves me from having to do paperwork once stream is over. So what do I say? Yeah, I mean, I'm giving it the navel. I mean, I may have affected chat right there. But yeah, I mean, it was a little too much fun. I'm giving it 2 brain dances. Yeah, so we're doing that. That's like, yeah. So, I mean, if like you're in philosophy, this is worth reading. I mean, there's a lot of sort of like we were saying, everyone's getting mentioned here because part of the point of this review I felt was to impress upon modern readers the significance of Hegel. So it's showing how many people Hegel's ideas have touched in the contemporary discussion. And so that's part of it. Unreal says, I think I saw one of his books, wasn't yet too far, but I don't remember Brandom's language being quite that thickety. Yeah. So, I mean, it may just be for, rhetorical flourish here. Lumen says there are longer essays on his site that make similar points with less jokiness. Yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. He's obviously a massive Hegel fan. And calling everyone out, being like, you should read more Hegel. But yeah. All right. If anyone else wants to get in, now's the time. 60 seconds left. Get your reviewing. And then we'll go find somewhere to drop people off. Give a little raid. Yeah. Hegel fanboy. That's exactly what this is. This is just sort of this is fan service, Like, they're fans. They're, writing sort of a love letter to Hegel. It's like, yeah, why isn't everyone loving Hegel so much? It's like, yeah. And as I said, I'm on the pro-Hegel train. I think that a lot of the stuff that I've seen in Hegel is still, interesting, got like a different perspective on stuff. Like I was just arguing a minute or two ago, if you're going to try to argue the kind of inference that Hegel is thinking about versus the kind of inference that happens in logic or in other areas, you're going to have a rather sophisticated discussion. The fact that you have to have a rather sophisticated discussion implies that like there's actual like disagreements in what's going on. And that's not so easy, that you need to be like, okay, we're going to discuss inference now, like a really narrow topic, even in philosophy. And like, then exactly what is the difference here? And it's an important topic. It matters in logic. It matters in the social area. It matters in metaphysics. So it's like, this is something that touches all sorts of other philosophy. So yeah. Okay. But that's it for this.